Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Vidi for those of you who are new here. And today we are reviewing the books I read for October. So not much intro, that's all there is. So let's just jump straight into the reviews. Avoid making this video longer than it needs to be. So starting off with some statistics. So this month I read a total of 9 books. 2 books were on Kindle, 7 were physical books. I read 2 young adult fantasies, 3 thriller books, 3 fantasy, and 1 children's book. In total this month, I read 3,828 pages. I will be looking down because I did take some notes. I have my iPad on my lap. But starting off with the first book that I read this month, I read it on my Kindle, on Kindle Unlimited. That is The Divine and the Curse by J.E. Reid, Fae of Alastriona series. It's the first book of the series. This book is about Ariana, who is basically an undercover princess that was kidnapped and taken as a slave at 16 years old. 2 years later, an army of her kingdom's rival actually intervenes while the slaves are being transported and is taken away by them to a nearby camp, not knowing that she's the princess of this other kingdom. So then there, Ariana meets Ryan, also known as the demon, and is absolutely terrified by him and all the stories that surround him. He is notoriously known for just like a very brutal killer. But of course, she quickly learns that he is not the soulless monster that he is portrayed to be. Overall, what I thought, this was a gushy, low stakes, grumpy romance fantasy book. I really liked the depth of the characters of Ariana and Ryan. They were like the complete opposites of each other, and there was just so much depth and they were so misunderstood basically. This focuses more on the romance of the story rather than the world building and the fantasy aspect of it all, so there isn't much world building in this book. There's still a lot of questions you have about the world, a lot of questions you have about the war, what the actual plot of the overall series is going to be. It is the first book though, so we might get more of these questions answered later on. However, Ariana and Ryan's love story was just hee hee ha ha, kicking and giggling, and it was really cute and it was just super adorable. It is a young adult book, so it was very much kept to like young adult topics, nothing too explicit, but it was still a really good book. Overall, I'm going to rate this a 3.5 out of 5. And for spice, it's more of a metaphorical spice, a fade to black, so to speak. So I'm going to give it a 0.5 out of 5. So after that, I was very much feeling the spooky vibes and decided to pick up Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. So the story follows 3 siblings. These 3 siblings reunite after their mother's death. They all come back home and basically they're trying to set her affairs in order. Sorting through their mother's stuff, they end up finding a tape that says summer of 1999. They put it into the VHS and they end up seeing a dead body in that tape. So it kind of just spirals from there. This book was very entertaining. It definitely had those spooky elements in there, and it was a bit of a page turner. I think it was a little bit predictable, but it was the cliche that I wanted to read. It got the job done. So overall, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. As for any spice in here, it was more of a fade to black moment, but there is some adult content in there and adult language in there. So I'm going to give it a 0.5 out of 5 for spice. Let me put them here. I'm putting them on the floor, but let me put them here. That's why I brought this whole area over here. So after that, I was going to travel that month and I decided I need to pick up my really thick book because I do not want to carry that with me through my travels and I don't want to buy it on my Kindle. Let's bring out this monstrosity. House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book of the Crescent City series. This baby is huge. Miss Maas, right? Is it Miss? Mrs. Maas. What is this, first of all? Why is the first book this big? Why? This is a reread, by the way. The first time, I'm going to say I listened to it because I did not read it at all. I fully listened to it on my drive to Washington. Second time around, I actually sat down and read it. So this story follows our main character, Bryce Quinlan, who is half human, half fae, living in a supernatural, paranormal world, basically. One day, Danica, who's known to be one of the strongest shifters and has one of the strongest packs, is found murdered in their apartment with her pack just brutally gone. The story fast forward to almost 2 years later. It's found out that the original suspect that they had for Danica's and the pack's murder was actually innocent. The government basically recruits Bryce to find out what really happened to Danica. How did she die, especially since the murders are starting up again. Oh boy, my review for this one's long. I am a very much Mass fan. I really like her writing. I knew what I was getting into because I have already read this book, so I knew it was very much different from the other two, and I gave enough time in between to not feel like I'm jumping from medieval kind of fantasy, like the classic fantasy, to a, I forgot what they call it, but I called it like a futuristic fantasy. Pretty sure there's another term for it. Because I had fully read Throne of Glass and I had reread ACOTAR, I was actually also looking for any Easter eggs along here, which I have a whole different kind of like theories about this stuff. So if y'all want a video about my theories on the Mass universe, which there's so many videos out there, but if you guys want my thoughts, maybe after I'm done with this series, I can give my thoughts about that more in depth. But I will stand by my first ever comment that this book is too long. It is too long. It's interesting. There's a lot of world building, a lot of world building. It is a very long book. You have to really commit to it, because if I'm being honest, it doesn't pick up until the second third of this book. However, I did enjoy the plot. I feel like it had too many twists and turns. It did feel similar to her other plots. I'm not sure. I've only read the first book. We'll see how the next two books come out. I do enjoy the world. This is a very mixed opinion for a lot of people. I do enjoy the world. Like I said, it's very futuristic. It reminds me of Winx Club. It is very much, there's social media, there's clubs, there's drugs, there's alcohol. There's very much parallel to our universe, but in a fantasy universe. And I know, like I said, it's very hit or miss for some people, but I actually did enjoy it. I feel like it was a unique take to fantasy, but it's just really long. That's my number one complaint about this one. Another thing I'm surprisingly not a fan of is the romance in this book. I'm not a huge fan of Hunt. I feel like I'm trying so hard not to compare it to her rest of her series, but it's really hard to do so. I just don't think he's a strong character like the rest of the people in this book, and I also don't feel like he compares to the rest of the men in her overall world. I don't like Hunt. I did, however, love Bryce. I love Rune. Ugh. Rune. He is probably my favorite character. Rune and Lahaba. Love both of them. Basically, I really did like everyone. But I mean, it's not that I didn't like Hunt. I just wasn't interested in the romance, and I just didn't feel like his character was all that. However, I still want to continue this book because, per usual, the 100 last pages are a roller coaster. I am excited to read the second book. I was not ready to read it when I first listened to it the first time, but now that I actually took my time to see the details, read it all out, and just focus on the book rather than on driving, I am ready to read the second book. So I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5, and as for Spice, 2.5 out of 5. I'm gonna give my camera a break because she's overheating. I'll be right back. If my setup is a little bit different and I'm wearing different clothes and I just look slightly different, mind your own business. My audio was corrupted or something, so I have to record this whole section all over again, and yeah, let's do this. So the next book that I will be reviewing is Bewitched by Laura Thalassa. This is the first book in the Bewitched series. This was one of the books I read for one of the book clubs I'm in. So this story follows our main character, Celine Bowers, who is a witch and is applying, I believe it's a coven / university kind of style, and keeps constantly getting rejected. Finally, she applies again and she asks like,
hey, what can I do to better my application?
So they recommend to her, find a familiar, get a familiar, and go through a new quest because the one you did sucks. She decides, okay, enough is enough. Through a drunk night, books tickets for a cruise and a plane to get to that cruise, and decides to go to South America. On her way to South America, she is traveling over Peru, I believe is the area. Her plane starts to get taken over by this dark magic that only she can see. She basically tries to fight this magic and manages to push it away and make the plane land safely rather than crash, as well as saving everyone in there. In this area where they landed, she finds this catacomb kind of area, I believe it's what it was, discovers this old ancient powerful ruler and accidentally wakes him up and sets him free. As I was writing a summary of the story, I'm just like, wow, so much happened while like not necessarily a lot happened in the overall plot. This is not my first Laura Thalassa book. I'm usually a fan of her books. I like her dark romance approach, and she's always writing enemies to lovers pretty well. She does a really good job of cementing that confusing relationship between the enemies because it's dark, it's confusing, it's toxic. However, this book personally for me was not it, mostly because I really did not like the main love interest, Memnon. I feel like I should be able to say this, but I can't. So we're gonna stick to main love interest. It was like,
I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, but you're mine and you're not going anywhere kind of situation.
And you know, that's fine and all. I'm okay with that. But it's a dark romance. But the problem is that it was the same conversation over and over again. Same goes with the main character. She never really stood her ground until the very end, and I'm just like, yes. And it was kind of like frustrating to see the back and forth between it. It was just not my favorite. I did not really like the story. Like, I enjoyed some parts of it, but for the most part, not a huge fan, and I will probably not be continuing the series. So overall, I'm going to give this a 2.5 out of 5. And as for Spice, I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5 as well. I like Laura Thalassa. This was just not for me. So the next book I picked up after that was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. I think it's a saga, but it says trilogy here, but I'm pretty sure, I don't know, there might be 4 books. If you're looking for this on Goodreads or Audible, just a heads up, it comes up as The Final Empire, not as Mistborn, even though the book itself is called Mistborn. So this is a young adult fantasy book. This follows 2 point of views actually. Kelsier, who is this mid-30s guy who was a thief and got caught and was sent to Hathsin, which is kind of like a mining jail. Basically everyone dies. Everyone that goes in there dies. He has been the only one that has survived and escaped. So that's Kelsier. And then the other point of view is Vin, who is 16 years old. She is also part of a thieving crew trying to survive after her brother abandoned her. From the very beginning, we find out that both Kelsier and Vin are what are known as half-breeds in this book, which is they're part Ska and part nobility. So basically, this follows Kelsier, who recruits Vin to be part of his crew, and the crew is going to be helping the Ska rebellion to overthrow the Lord Ruler. I had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into when reading this, hence why I don't want to give too much of a summary. I just looked up fantasy authors and Brandon Sanderson came up and was one of the highly recommended ones. This was the first book that almost everyone recommended to start with, so I'm just like, okay, I picked it up. I thought it was gonna be a little bit of sci-fi for some reason, but no, this is like pure fantasy. It is a really good fantasy book. It is a high epic fantasy book with high stakes, big character arcs. There's political play, there's power play, there's just so much going on in this book, and it is absolutely amazing. I think what makes this book really good too is that you do have the 2 main point of views, Kelsier and Vin. So you see the rebellion side of it all, Kelsier's side, and then you see the nobility side of it all, which is Vin's side. But then you also see the difference between a grown adult and his train of thought, and then a young girl and her train of thought. So it's really interesting seeing the combination of both and seeing how their character develops throughout the whole story as well. It's a really good story, and it was just a really good book overall. It is exactly what I wanted when I was looking for a fantasy book. I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. And as for Spice, it's a young adult book. Absolutely no spice. So after that, I picked up Glint by Raven Kennedy. This is the second book in the Plated Prisoner series. Without giving too much of what happened in the first book, which wasn't much because as I mentioned before, there was no plot, our main character Arin finds herself in the mercy of King Rot's army and is paired up with Commander Rip, which is notoriously known for being a very brutal and deadly commander. However, after a while of being with the King Rot's army, she's starting to realize that people are not really treating her poorly, and these people are treating her better than what she was being treated at the castle, and is starting to question basically her reality, who she is, her world, the people around her. Like I said, I don't want to give too much away, so I'm gonna stop the summary there. This book still has no plot. This book has no plot. Oh my god. This is the second book in the series and there's still not a plot. Like, I understand the build-up and kind of where it's going to, and towards the end, I think maybe the last like 50 pages, you start moving a little bit faster towards a plot, hopefully, but there's still no plot. It's a little bit frustrating because I thought that it would pick up a little bit more on this book. That aside, I do like the conflict that Arin is feeling and is questioning basically everything, because we just want to see our main character break free and just grow into the strong character we all know she will be. We start to see a little bit more of that and like how confused she is about everything and everyone around her. I do find that realistic and a little bit annoying to read, being in her head, but also it makes sense. I feel like this book is still character development as well as introduction of new characters. You get a bunch of different characters that we did not see at all in the first book, but there's no world building. We are set in this same area, same space for a really long time, and eventually towards the end of the book we finally move to a new space, a new place in the world. It kind of talks a little bit about the world around her, but not too in detail yet, so there's not too much world building in this book. Something I would like to see from this book, which I don't know, I think my opinions might change later, is we get the point of view of Queen Melina at some point. I really want to see a collab between Queen Melina and Orin. I want to see them unite forces because I feel like they'd be such badass characters together and go against King Midas. I have absolutely no idea if that's going to happen. There's a possibility that I might hate with passion Queen Melina, but at the moment I really like her, and I know a lot of people think she's annoying, but I kind of like her because she's another product of what happens being under King Midas's control. So unlike the first book, this book was not as triggering. It did talk about triggering stuff, but it didn't have any explicit scenes like the first book did. It was a lot more subdued as well. Overall, I'm going to rate this a 3 out of 5, and as for spice, there was no spice, just some adult language here and there. So the book that I picked up after that is actually on my Kindle, and that's The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden. I read this on Kindle Unlimited, and this is also another book I read for another book club that I'm in. So this story follows our main character Sydney, who is trying really hard to find the love of her life. She just wants to settle down. She's over dating. She wants to have a family. She wants to have maybe kids, and she just really wants to settle down. Especially after seeing how annoyingly in love her friends are. One day, Sydney finds her friend dead in her room, and the cops are basically saying that possibly the person who murdered her friend was the boyfriend, but no one knows who the boyfriend is because her friend never introduced them to him. This is a Frida McFadden book. If you read a Frida McFadden book, you know exactly her writing style. It's very easy to consume. It's very bingeable. It's a bit of a page turner. Nothing too dramatic, nothing too serious, except for one book. One book was weird. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into when reading this, and it was just kind of a good palate cleanser almost because it was so easy to read. What McFadden does pretty well is really able to throw these twists and turns, so I'll give her credit where it's due. I thought I knew what was going on in the book, and then it was kind of determined that that was not the case, and I'm like,
oh well, I have no theories.
But yeah, it was a pretty easy book to consume. I don't have much else to say for this book. It was a nice read for a thriller. So I'm going to rate The Boyfriend a 3 out of 5, and for spice, I actually cannot remember. I think there's none, but I might be wrong. So finally, we were getting to Halloween weekend. I wanted something Halloweenish, something spooky, but like just Halloween vibes. I decided to finally read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This is a reread, however, I'm not counting it as a reread because I read this when I was like, I want to say 10. So a long time ago. Coraline is about a girl who moves into this huge Victorian house that was made into a complex, right? She has these very funky neighbors, has her parents who work from home and basically kind of show that they can be a little bit neglectful and don't pay attention to Coraline, and they're just telling her to go entertain herself. One day Coraline ends up finding this door that is very tiny and she's curious about it, so she asks her mom pulls out a key, opens the door to show her that it leads to nowhere. It got blocked off when they made the house into multiple living spaces. One day she gets attracted to this door out of curiosity and she opens it, and it turns out that it actually does lead to somewhere, and she goes through and she sees that it's an exact replica of where she lived, but better. So yeah, it just follows the story of Coraline, who travels through this magic door and learns that she has another family, another mother, another father. It's just a very spooky, creepy kind of book. First of all, I can't believe I read this when I was so small, because like I can finally understand why this book kind of creeped me out so much now that I'm reading it as an adult. It is very disturbing. Also, something that I forgot was how clever Coraline is. Like, we know this from the movie, but in the book she is so much more clever than in the movie. Like, she has these crazy ideas and she's just a really clever girl. She's a really smart girl. Her parents, yes, are neglectful, but not in the same way that it's portrayed in the film. It's more of like, I gotta work. And I feel like being an adult, I kind of understand that a little bit more too. So like maybe that's where my perspective is coming from. But it's just very interesting reading this as an adult than when I was younger. But I really like this film. Perfect for like spooky vibes and just set the mood. And it's a kid's book. I read this in one day, so it was really easy. So overall, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. Great book. Amazing book. Loved it. If you've watched the movie, I recommend reading it. It's a really good book. So last but not least, I read Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. This was the last book I picked up. So Daughter of Mine is another thriller. This story is about 3 siblings who basically oh my god, this sounds like the same plot. It's about 3 siblings who basically reunite after their father's death. I promise it's not the same plot. So it follows the story of Hazel Sharp, who goes back home for her father's funeral because her father passed away. And her father used to be a detective in town, and he was very well known, very well loved by the town. This is a small town, by the way. While all of this is happening, there's a drought going on in North Carolina, and oh, by the way, they're in North Carolina. There's a drought happening in North Carolina. A lot of things are starting to get uncovered because of the drought. Specifically in this small town, the same day that was her father's funeral, a car was found in their lake. And it's a great mystery because they have no idea whose car it is. That's kind of like the gist of the story without revealing too much. I really like this thriller. This was a really good thriller because you're not sure what the mystery necessarily is. Like, you are given little like pieces here and there, but you don't know what it is. However, I feel like in this thriller, there's like 3 different stories happening at the same time, and that on itself can be a little bit confusing. So it is a little bit hard to follow in that sense, but it's a good thriller because you're not sure what's going to happen. It took me for a ride and I was here for the ride. I enjoyed it. And you know, I kind of just realized, wow, literally every thriller happens in a small town. So you're either gonna find an epic romance or a dead body. I'm so sorry. Thrillers. I think overall I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. Yeah, that's my rating. It's a 4 out of 5. I enjoyed it. It was a good book. I really liked it. It was a page turner and it felt unique because you really did not know what was going on at all. Or I didn't. If you guys did, wow, please tell me if I'm dumb because I really did not know. But yeah, those are all the books I read for October. If you have read any of these books, please let me know in the comments below what you think. I would love to pick your brain, have a discussion. Like I mentioned before, I love talking books. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already and you would like to, please subscribe. I like to make book content and lifestyle / vlog / travel stuff. I don't travel that much, but lately I have. Thank y'all so much for watching. Have a beautiful day and I will see y'all next time. Bye bye.